Thanks for joining us again today on Practical Church Planting. We're going to be giving you 6 things that church planters can learn from Disney.
And I always want to say, if you're listening to this, good job. I know, obviously, there's a tendency to look at like topics and see if you want to listen to the episode or not, and you're like, Disney. But I think this will be helpful. So a couple weeks ago, Christine and I went to Disney without our kids for our 10-year anniversary. And even though it's not fully what Disney normally is because of the pandemic, I couldn't help but think about how this affected the church and things that we can learn and maybe things that we should not do based on my experience. And so these are just random stuff that can help improve, you impacting more people at your church.
Yep.
So here's the first thing. The first thing is actually something, the other 5 things are worth emulating. The first thing is something that you should not emulate. And I still think about it, and it still bums me out.
How you can do better than Disney.
Don't do what Disney did, because I've been a part of churches that also did this, and just being somewhere. Well, let me just explain this. So we stayed at a Disney resort hotel because they're like 25% off right now because I guess COVID, and they ask you, and you have this Disney app that you check in, you do all this stuff through the app, right? So the Disney hotel asks you if you're there for a special occasion, and it has a list of things like anniversary, wedding, honeymoon, whatever. So I thought, because they're asking and it's Disney, they would do something with that information.
Okay.
Brian, did they do anything with that information?
I'm guessing no.
Nothing.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Nothing.
Because it was your
Disney hotel.
anniversary.
Yeah, we went for our 10-year anniversary. And they specifically asked, are you here for a reason? And you check it. We also had 2 dinner reservations at 2 Disney places that they run. They all asked the same thing, all the same checklists. Why are you here for a special anniversary? Did either of those dinner places do anything for our anniversary?
That's hilarious. I guess not.
Nothing. No dessert, no nothing. Now, here's the thing. I would not have expected them to do anything had they not asked.
Right.
But the fact that they asked and did nothing with the information, not only did it bum me out, but it also frustrated me because I know how this stuff works. They want information for their own records to figure out who's coming for what. And to ask people for something and then not to follow up with that, it comes across as very selfish. Now, I'm not saying that's their, whatever. Yeah. But it was just surprising that it's Disney and you expect them to go above and beyond, to have them specifically ask on multiple occasions why you're at this thing and then do nothing with it. Now, what does this have to do with churches? If you have like a Connect card or something like that and you ask people to check specific boxes, community groups, serving, baptism, whatever you have going on, and you do not follow up with that specific thing, then people can get frustrated and you've missed a great opportunity. So if we have like a standardized follow-up process. We use text in church. They get, a couple of weeks worth of text and emails, whatever. So if you fill out a Connect card, you get that. But if you also check any of those specific things, you also get a separate follow-up about that specific thing, because otherwise, why would you ask? Like, I remember Christine and I were part of a church years ago, and it was a larger church, and we tried to sign up to serve, and nobody responded to us, which was a bummer in itself. But then they had a serve push Sunday, because it was like August and summer or the fall's coming, whatever. Yeah. And they had like cars on everyone's seats. We filled out it again. Nothing. Literally on their push day. Nothing. Well, what is happening here? And so all that to say, if you ask for specific information on a Connect card or an event or whatever, you need to follow up about that specific thing. Otherwise, people are like, why did I give you that information? And you just should not do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are getting more and more, I don't know if hesitant's the right word, but maybe hesitant to give out their information just because, especially if they've been in church world for a while, they know they're going to be added to an email list. They know what kind of comes with it. But then to do nothing with it, I feel like would give the impression of, we asked you to do this thing that in some cases maybe you didn't really want to do a whole lot, but were willing to. And we didn't even do anything with it. To me, it just looks like we were unprepared for a new person to come in, and you came, and then we didn't even know what to do with it. And granted, not every person is going to go through this whole line of thinking, but it's the kind of thing where if you're going through the trouble of asking someone to take a step, then you need to kind of meet them halfway and also take a step. They did something, you need to do something in return.
So like us, we have like a standardized process. So if you have a standardized thing, even if the standardized thing some addresses their thing at some point, you need to address it quickly. So if you give us your information, we have an email, you get 4 or 5 emails over 3 weeks or something. Stuff. And it's in one of those emails that talks about partnership or social media, whatever. So it's coming, but it's not coming right away. And they need it right away. And if you don't have a standardized follow-up process and it's just you emailing people or whatever, you should still tailor that follow-up to a specific thing. And if they checked, for example, like membership or partnership, you should not say, I saw you saw this, do you have any questions? You should have at least a couple of things to tell them about whatever it is you're asking them about, and then say, do you have any other questions? But just using that as an example, if you have a partnership lunch or discover your church or whatever, like when is the next one? Or if they sign up for groups, you should say like, here's what groups look like. Can you tell me where you live or what nights are available, whatever. But have some information to give them because they asked for it. And so, yeah, if you ask for specific information, you have to follow up about it. Because there's people just like, they're going to be like, why did I give you this information? And it's just not going to leave a good impression.
Well, I think we all want our people to communicate more. Like, for instance, if you have a family that maybe leaves your church and you kind of left wondering like, if there's an issue, why didn't you bring it up beforehand? You may not say that, but maybe thinking like if there's an issue with somebody or the way we do things as a church, not that you would have changed things for them, but it just would have been nice for them to communicate that before just deciding to leave. If they communicate something with you like, hey, I want to serve community groups, I want to get baptized, and you don't follow up with them, then I don't know. I don't think we can really get that upset that they don't then communicate back with us if we're not communicating with them in the first place. So you're kind of setting that precedent of if someone has questions, whether they're serious or just like a question about how to serve, that they're not going to get maybe any response or at least not a quick response. So.
Yep. So follow up. Ask for information, please. Number 2. Now these are some things we should do. Answer questions people will ask. In other words, be proactive. And so they have. They have a really good signage, which is helpful. We've talked about other episodes. I mean, I liken it. I know this costs some money, but like an airport, you can navigate an airport without talking to anybody.
Yes.
Now you might have some questions if you miss it, but if like you were like really observant and looking around, I feel like that should be how it is for churches. Now you don't want that to you don't want people not to talk to anybody, but for those that are introverted, those who are learning, like if your auditorium is not obvious where to go, you should have signs. You should have signs telling people where to park. I mean, you should have parkers out there too. If your bathrooms are not obvious, like when you walk in the front door where they are, there should be a sign or like making it very obvious. And so they did a great job with signage, but they also did a great job with telling people where to go. So for example, our hotel, there was this Skyliner they built a couple years ago, which is connected to 2 of the parks, so you don't have to ride a bus, although the Skyliner actually takes more time than riding a bus. Maybe it's because of COVID stuff. I don't know. But like from where our hotel was, because we weren't like one of the close ones, on both parks that were accessed on the Skyliner, you had to get off and get back on, because they go different ways. And there's always a lot of people, especially in the beginning and the end of the night. And so they would have Disney people out there saying like, hey, if you're looking for this, go this way. Or they would, as you're like walking up to an area where there's like where it was like open and you're not quite sure where to go, they would have people proactively ask you, hey, where are you looking to go? And so they're just like, they know people are wondering what to do. And so they have it. Or, at Disney, there's long lines. And so, when the lines are long, it's like outside of the typical roped area. And so you don't know like where to actually get in. And so they have somebody who stands with a sign, says this is the end of the line. They're just very proactive about stuff that people have questions about, and so that should be for us. So, if your place is confusing, if you're at a school or whatever, what does it look like to be proactive to tell people, especially not in a way that makes people feel awkward for being new. So that's where signage can really help. Or, there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, are you looking for X? Not just, just being upfront about that. And so if there's things that are confusing, we talk about some other episodes as well, but like in preaching, like explaining your terms, if they're signing up for something, I mean, anything that might cause confusion, the question is, how can you be proactive about answering their questions? Maybe not answering all of their questions, but the fact that you've gone out of their way to address something means that you've thought about it. For example, we talk about this a lot. If you're new, like addressing new people every Sunday, with your Connect card or whatever, say, hey, if you're new with us, here's what we want you to do after service, because they're wondering if they want to do, if they're new and they're interested in your church, they are wondering what to do. And so being proactive about questions that people are asking ahead of time, I think goes a long way in making people feel comfortable.
Yeah, I think you really want to make sure people don't feel dumb at points, and that's like signage. I think is a huge deal in this case. Like, look, I can be the most extrovert or introverted person that there is. I don't want to ask someone where the bathroom is. Like, if I don't know, like, it's awkward, and it's not like I get we want people to communicate more, but I don't want to have to communicate that. Or like I was just thinking as you were talking, if I'm going into a new church or a new space and I don't know where the auditorium is, I get it's not like an offensive question to ask, but me as like church staff, if someone were to ask me where's the auditorium, I wouldn't think they're dumb. I would think, man, we did a really bad job. And so I don't want to imply that to someone else, like to ask where's the auditorium, the kind of main thing that you look for. If I can't find it, that's kind of implying you guys did a poor job. And that's not really something I want to tell someone, especially if I don't know them. And so I think having stuff like signage to the point where things are stupidly simple. Like if you have more than one entrance to a building, which entrance do I use? Or which parking lot do I use? Especially if you're portable. And like in a school or a bigger setting. Like in our old space, we had two front doors. One was to the kid space. At one point, it kind of changed, but one was to the kid space and one was to the main space. And for a little bit of time, they kind of like didn't do our signage the way it took them like forever to like put our building sign up that we didn't have control over. But so we had to put stuff outside. But if we didn't, like people would walk into the kids space.
And they just feel dumb. Like it's not a big deal, but you just feel bad.
And it's no fault of their own. Yeah. Like it's our fault for not doing it correctly. And I agree, things like preaching, it's just things like you don't want someone to walk around or after service walk around with a Connect card looking lost. Like people need to know what to do with things. So taking out all these barriers that just make people feel dumb, I think will really help encourage people to come back.
Yeah, and I'm all for using biblical theological language, using it, but explaining it or telling people like, hey, we're in this book of the Bible and giving a hint of where to go so that people know it's okay to flip. I mean, for us, it's a little different because we have Bibles in all of the seat backs, and for us, we put the page number, and so people like, they can, if they don't know where it is, they literally just, but like stuff like that. I'll give you a story of how this didn't go well. We had a couple who just moved to Georgia 6 weeks or so ago. They were in town this weekend, so they came and they were telling me how they're looking at these other churches, and they went to this really large church, and they were so confused about where to go. And it's a large church, so, that can make sense. So, that's forgivable, but they're like, there's no signage. But here's the problem. They had like a new guest parking spot area, like for new people. So they parked there, and they still had no idea where to go because nobody told them.
Oh, man.
So they have this space for new people, but then there's nobody out there saying, hey, here's where you go, or maybe they did and they were walking someone else, but then having a signage. And so we were talking, there's a group of us, and someone said, why don't you just follow the foot traffic? And they said, well, we did follow the foot traffic. And it took us to the kids' check-in area. Because, and they also still had no idea where to go. So it took them forever because it was really large. Now, again, if you're listening to this, that's probably not your case.
Sure, yeah.
But what are some small things that people are asking that you can be proactive for that just that help people feel awkward? So not awkward. So like where things are in your space, service flow. I think for us, we started doing after COVID, like we have a part of our service where we do confession, and we haven't always done a good job explaining it. Like some people explain it really well and some people don't. And so, about a month or so ago, I've told everyone who does the confession moment, every week you have to explain what it is. Super, super quick. Yeah. We're just honest with God about a brokenness. And why do we do it? Because God always responds to repentance with grace. And so if you're brand new and you're just like, this is weird, at least you like know what we're doing. Yeah. And so anything that you think might be questionable, and if you're like, well, I don't know, here's the best way to answer this. I don't know what questions people might be asking. Think of someone who you care for, who's not a Christian, who's never been to church, and they decide to show up in your church on a Sunday. How would you explain things? What signage would you want there to be out there? Like, what would you do differently, and try to move in that direction so that you can answer questions people are going to ask? Yeah, and like, it's hard because people will. I feel like you can't make things too simple. I'm not talking about like preaching wise, like that's a little bit of a line to balance. But like in your space, I've had someone here before, which I know if you're watching this, actually you can see. But if you're listening to on the podcast, like we have one big, large, open, if you're on YouTube lobby. There's right there. There's the auditorium, and above it, in very plain letters, it says worship center. So like it's very clear where things happen. And I've had someone ask, like, I don't know if I've had a mass on a Sunday, but people have like come in during the week and just like looking around and be like, so where's your auditorium? And it's like, well, it's like you cannot get simpler. And so like I think we do a fine job at it, but it's just something to remember that if someone's never been to your space before, they may have these like really, really simple questions. And as much as you can do to kind of put it in their face and put it in front of them to make it as simple as possible, the better. Yeah. So number 3, friendly environments cannot be overstated. Now, here's the thing. Like, yes, Disney is whatever, happiest place on earth. Right. It was definitely, there was no like, there's a lot of stuff that was closed. And so, like, I know it wasn't the normal Disney. Like, it was nice. Yeah. It's not something that I haven't been since I was a kid. So it's not something I'd be like, I want to go back. But I know it would be a little bit better. But anyway, you can assume, well, everyone's just in a good mood because they're just on vacation. Yeah. And maybe. Yes, that's definitely part of it. But also, like, it's like Chick-fil-A. Mm-hmm. The vast majority of the employees are friendly, which is, it's saying something because a lot of what they do is very monotonous. Mm-hmm. Like you're pressing go on a ride or you're answering the same questions over and over again all day. But they're so friendly and they're proactive with their friendliness. Mm-hmm. And so it makes a big deal. Now, what this has to do with church is obviously you're not paying people to stand at your door or whatever. But it's just true that some churches have a culture of welcome. And we've had other episodes. We've done so many, but you can search about like serve teams and hospitality and stuff. Yeah. Some churches do this great. Like they're very welcoming and warm, regardless of theology or whatever. And some churches don't do it very well.
Yes.
And it is not true that all of the nice and happy people go to one church and all of the angry people go to another church.
True.
It's the culture, it can take time, that they've developed. And so, like, you know, the people on your serve teams, do they know why you do what they do? So this is really helpful, you know, having serve trainings, or if it's a new person, maybe we'll have Abby who does our stuff. Maybe we should have her on to talk about our process. But like if you sign up to serve, you're not just out a door.
Yeah.
And in fact, your first week, you actually shadow somebody, which seems kind of, but we talk about why we do things. I remember at our old space when we were newer and somebody asked me why we have people in the parking lot. He was serving and he's like, I don't really see why. And of course, we explain why. It's like, if you're new, in your smaller church, you don't need to be told where to park, but you do need to know you're in the right place.
Yep.
And that people expected people like you who are not exactly sure what to do to be there. And so talking to your serve teams about why, not just what you're supposed to do, because we get it, but they don't. But doing things that, again, that create an environment of warmth and, you know, acceptance and caring for people goes a big way. Disney is not just a happy place because people are on vacation. Their employees are all very, you know, go out of their way to make it a positive environment, which makes you enjoy it more.
Yeah, and it's something where if you don't have it right now, it'll take a little bit of time to like build that culture.
Yeah.
But I think the way to build it is to keep reminding your people of the importance of what they're doing and the importance of, as silly as it may sound to someone who's like leading the church, the importance of being happy. Like it is like something that if you're someone like for an outward facing position like greeting or something like that, and you're not, it's happy, it's very noticeable. And it's weird to tell adults like you need to be happy. It just is. And I've done it. And it's really weird to say like, remember, we smile. Like it feels like you're talking to kindergartners. But it's just something that people, there are some people who just, that's not their natural resting face. You know, they're just there, or maybe they legitimately had a bad morning and they're not happy. But it's just important to remind them that at this position, you know, at this point where we are, you're the first face that people see. And so they need to see something that's welcoming. It doesn't mean you got to like be fake and jump up and down, but they need to feel welcome. And if you're, you know, scowling at them, or if you're not paying attention because you're upset or something like that, then maybe this isn't the position for you, or maybe today's not the day for you, whatever. Maybe there's different things that this person can do, but the importance of being welcoming and happy to see people, because like, we are happy to see people, you know, like if I'm at the door, I'm happy to see someone come in. I don't want this place to be empty. And so just reminding people the importance of what they're doing. Cause I think especially if you're in a small church, I mean, it happens with us. You have people that serve probably more than you want them to, because you need positions filled. And over time, positions get monotonous. You know, if you park every week or if you hold the door, it gets monotonous. And so reminding people the importance of it, that you're not just standing here opening a door for somebody, but what you're doing is actually important, and here's why. I think it'll help people see that they're not just kind of another piece of the puzzle, but they're actually playing an important role. Yeah,
and you don't have to be like a hyper extrovert to be friendly.
True.
And I do think part of this is training, but part of this is like from the stage, and like you can help create this culture by talking about how you want people to feel loved and cared for when they come. Now, it helps when you have new people show up pretty regularly, because then people know, oh, there's new people who actually, like if you never have any new people, it can be harder. If you're struggling to plant and launch, I would just say go to our practicalplanting.com/launch and get our launch team course. That'll help you, you know, do some things to attract some new people. So that helps, but also just saying things like, you know, there are new people, like we want people to feel cared and loved for, but I think sharing stories too about how your church has impacted people, even if it's, you know, just people that have been at your church for a long time, lets them know that what they do matters. And so from time to time, we've done it various ways. We've started this thing, which I know not everyone can do. We do this thing called New City Stories once every 2 months or so, and we have people share how New City has impacted them via video, which is really helpful, because that reminds people, like, I might not feel like I'm doing that much by standing at the door and giving, but people say that. Or there are times where people will send me emails, and so I'll share them from time to time on a Sunday morning or in an email, or like in our giving statements that we do quarterly, to remind people what they're doing. So I think part of this is, you know, trying to train people in a way, but also reminding them that what they do matters, you know, and sharing stories of how they've impacted them, you know, and emphasizing that, like, the sermon and even the worship is, you want that to be good, and that's a big reason people will come back. One of the reasons, but if they feel like nobody cares about them and it's awkward before and after the service, they're not going to come back. And so just emphasizing the fact that you want people to be cared for and loved, you know, makes a difference.
Yeah, that's good.
Now that point goes with this point, and then I've got a little pet peeve, a little soapbox I'll get on. Here's the next one. That preparation leads to a much better experience. So, we've talked about this a little bit, maybe not surprising. When COVID hit, and just for a while, people talk about how like Sunday's not that, the end all be all, and we got other things, which I fully agree with. But also, I think COVID showed us that Sundays are extremely important, and that's where the vast majority of people who are going to get connected at your church, their first step is a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
When you don't have a Sunday morning, I mean, we all know this. Did your church grow? The answer to that question is not really.
Right. Right.
Like the bigger churches might have grown some over COVID because their production value was very good. Most smaller churches, their production was not great. So you might have had like one or two, and we kind of assume like the exception is the rule.
Right.
But like, in fact, a lot of churches that planted right before COVID shut down. There's a church in Raleigh. Talked to another guy a couple weeks ago. It was the same case where they planted right before COVID, and they couldn't meet people because online.
Yeah.
So there's this like way to like say like Sunday is important, but not that important. So I would just tell you, church planters, Sunday is vitally important. Vitally important. And not only that, I was talking to a guy, this thing I was at last week, he's in the launch phase, like six months out or less, something like that. And I was like, man, you should buy a course. I didn't tell him that, but I wanted to. But the problem was they weren't doing anything on Sundays. And so he was talking about, again, it's a typical church planning strategy of like, if you can get people connected without a Sunday morning, and then you add a Sunday morning, well then how much better is it going to be?
Sure.
And I've fully come to a place where, but that's just not, it's helpful to have an anchored weekly rhythm together. Now, if you're pre-launch, it doesn't have to be a full-blown service. And in fact, if you're far away, I wouldn't do a service every week. But I would do a weekly gathering on Sundays in the morning or in the afternoon, something where it's not just like every other week we have this serve team thing, but we're not really friends yet. And so we want to serve the community people we don't know. And then we get frustrated that nobody shows up, all sorts of things. Like, all that to say, you should prepare well. I mean, Disney is a great experience, and people want to go back there because they are prepared.
Yeah.
And so we talk about this in other episodes. You should have a service run through. You should do the best of your ability to have people serving on your hospitality team in strategic positions. Your kids, it should be as good as you can do it. I mean, it's not like you don't need to compare yourself to other churches, but to your best ability, you should prepare. Even with like online stuff, people talk about, I mean, it's changed a little bit because of COVID, but you have pastors who aren't good at social media or who aren't really active themselves, which is nothing wrong with that. But then that attitude kind of bleeds into the church, and like, the social media, it's not that big of a deal. I heard a guy of a larger church back in February, I was at this pastor's gathering thing, and he kind of made this offhanded comment. It's like, it doesn't even matter. And almost like, well, if you would prepare and you would take it in, and you don't have to, but somebody on your church should. Yeah. All that to say, like, you should prepare specifically on Sunday morning, because sometimes that gets like, we act like it's not that big of a deal or whatever. You should prepare well. You should, if you can, your band should practice ahead of time. If you have enough people that can do that, your preaching should not be you writing the sermon on a Thursday or a Friday or a Saturday. We have episodes about how to get ahead, but better preparation leads to a better experience. And if you want people to connect with Jesus, we shouldn't pretend like preparation is not important.
Well, if you're the leader, if you're a pastor, and you are not prepared, or if you do things in a way that you're not prepared, or wait till the last minute for a lot of things, or just let things fall through the cracks a lot, as you start to bring on staff, that's the culture you're building. And so that's not just going to be you. It's very unlikely you're going to bring on staff that then whip you as the leader into shape.
Yep.
Most likely you'll bring on staff and they'll adopt your habits. And so as you're if you're like an unprepared person, and Sunday mornings are always kind of frantic, and we're behind on things, and I wait till the last minute to write my message, and so I'm that's the staff you're going to get. And most likely, in most cases, that's as you hire people, that's the culture you're going to create. And while you may feel like the way we're doing things is maybe manageable because it's just me, the more people you bring on that have that same mindset, the more you build that culture, the harder and harder it is going to be to sustain. And it's going to end up being real tough to have this thing of not preparing. It was funny you mentioned about preparing preaching. If you're newer with us, we're big advocates of like, prepare ahead of time. Be a few weeks out. Long story short, I saw a post. I don't remember the whole the whole thing about it, but it was basically a post about like, appreciate your pastor because this is how hard he has it. Kind of was like the gist, and it was like listing all these things that like a pastor has to go through every week, and one of it was something along the lines of, and it's coming towards the end of the week, and wrestling with this message, and got to get it written by the deadline of Saturday, for Sunday, and so it's like losing sleep trying to get it written. And I'm reading this thinking like, this shouldn't be like pastors have it tough. Like it's not like I'm saying it's the easiest job in the world, but this should not be one of the reasons that it's tough because you're waiting till the last minute to get things done. Like we have 40 hours in the week if you're full time, or whatever if you're bivocational. But like there's ways to do things that aren't waiting until the last minute. So if it's something you're struggling with, definitely get a handle on it now before you grow even bigger, because it's going to be harder and harder to get a handle on.
Yeah, and it's like we all want our churches to grow, but then we kind of mock some of the things that lead to that.
Yeah, that lead
as
to
if
growth,
they don't,
right.
as if they're not important. And so, like, I'll give you some practical examples of things that we do. Now, I'll just say some things happen last minute, like our computer crash, and so
for sure
that was awesome. And so our service, the average person probably wouldn't have noticed. We had to use a laptop, so some of the stuff wasn't there. But like we do a lot of things that, I put it this way. We're not great for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of things we don't do that's not great.
Yes.
But we are certainly, like, if you come to New City Church on a Sunday morning, the quality of our service is much better than most churches our size. And it's been like that forever. Now, can COVID kind of reduced our in-person numbers?
Sure.
So then I guess that makes it even more true.
Yeah.
But part of that is just we prepare a lot. And so some of the things that we do now, this might seem like a lot for us, but I would just say have this mindset. What do you want your church to look like in a couple of years? Do you want to have 100, 150 people? Most people would say yes. Well, then there's certain things you should do to help that, and it's not unspiritual to do that. So, like we are multiple weeks out preaching. Why does that matter? Well, we plan the songs around the sermon, which you don't have to do that. It's fine. But if you can, especially if you sing songs after the sermon as well, like that's really helpful. And so being ahead of time lets us do that. Our screens, like we've got, our service worship slides. Each song has a different background. It's not distracting, but we've got backgrounds on them. We've got name tag things that pop up when a new person's speaking on the screen. We've even got it to where, like our Spotify, like Kevin, who's our worship productions guy, like he will play the last song that we sang. As soon as we say New City Church, you are sent, it will go up.
It'll come in.
And so you can hear it again. And not only that, at the end of our service, we have the guy on keys. As we do a couple of quick like ending service things coming out of the last song, he'll keep playing, but he'll play in the song in the same key that the song on Spotify is in, so that transition doesn't sound awkward. There's lots of small things like that the average person wouldn't know. But here's the thing: if you take care of the small details, the bigger things will happen because you've developed a habit of like all the stuff everything matters, and so. Whatever that looks like for you, I would prepare more than you think you should. It's not unspiritual. And your chances of impacting more people will be greater if your Sunday, and everything else you do, but specifically on Sundays, are not thrown together last minute. There is no reason for it to be thrown together last minute. If you don't have the time, then you shouldn't be in ministry. Like if you can't, like, again, with your budget and with your people, that's obviously variable. But in terms of have you prepared, if the answer is no, then don't expect more people to come, and don't be frustrated when they don't, and don't be like, God, I'm trying to be faithful when you might actually not be faithful. You not be as faithful as you could be.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because you mentioned, this past week of when we're recording this, our computer crashed, and we run literally everything on Sunday. And so, it was we figured it out and it worked. Our production guy basically figured everything out. But one of the reasons that we figured out that it was an issue is because he puts things in ahead of time.
Yep.
Like if we didn't use that computer, if he didn't put in he puts in all of our notes and everything like that, and all the lyrics on Wednesdays. If he did that Sunday mornings, which is not really that unheard of a thing to do in a lot of cases, then we may not have known this was an issue until Sunday morning, in which case we literally would have had nothing. Like it took days to get this other laptop up and running. It wasn't like we could just plug something in. But because he prepares ahead of time, we're able to figure out that there was going to be an issue and figure out a Band-Aid for it before anyone else knew.
Yeah.
So this is just things come up, and if you're waiting for everything last minute, then when something comes up, it is an emergency, and you can't do anything about it because you didn't have time to prepare.
And it's helpful too, so we do run through on Sundays, and the fact that all of my sermon notes are put in on Wednesday. Now, something might be tweaked Saturday night, Sunday morning, but tweaking something is different than putting everything in.
Yes.
And so if everything's already in, when you do your run through, I mean, I obviously don't preach my sermon, but we just click through the slides. We don't have typos, which wasn't always the case. And so stuff like that is, if you wait till last minute, it's just going to be super chaotic. And so Disney's prepared, which leads to a good experience, and we should be, as prepared as we can be given our context and situation. So preparation leads to a much better experience. That was number 4. Number 5. This is a good one. We're all saying I'm into this. You miss out if you don't go in person.
Yes, can't do Disney virtually.
Now, of course, all of us would agree. But I would say it's not. You shouldn't feel bad. You shouldn't apologize for this statement to be true.
Mhm.
So I would encourage people and say things like, you know, we say things like church online is a supplement, not a substitute.
Mhm.
You know, in our partnership thing now, or in our, people are new to New City. That's something that I've now included. That our online stuff is meant for if you're sick or you're out of town.
Right.
But if that's something you do regularly, this is not the church for you.
Mhm.
Like emphasize the importance, and we all know it's true. Again, COVID has showed this. Like new people, they might have watched online, but they didn't really get connected to your church.
Mhm.
Like there is a few churches, and I think what makes this difficult is some larger churches were doing, they were shut down for in-person gatherings, but they were larger, and so they would do like their partnership or membership classes for new people.
Mhm.
And then those of us that are smaller feel bad because,
Yeah.
but again, their pool was so much larger and their online experience was so much better. Of course, they had a couple, and
Yeah.
you might have had one or two people that connected with you online, and so you assumed that, well, this is fine, but you would have had more people. All of us would agree if we had never closed down on Sunday mornings, our churches would have more people than they do currently.
Right. Yes.
And so all that to say, it matters. And so don't feel bad emphasizing that, not in a guilt way, but you do miss out if you're online. And it's, I don't know. If we care about people's spiritual development, we've got to be able to challenge people in a way, especially, as vaccines numbers go down, whatever your state is. I know it's various places. Just, encourage people and tell people like this is what we care about, and you will not have the same experience in your faith if you are online only.
Yeah, it's funny. We so our live stream setup we went over like during COVID. We kind of revamped it and made it a lot better than it used to be. Well, it didn't exist, so we made it and then made it better. And we worked on it, and we're kind of at a point now where I mean, we for our budget, for our size, I think we've put a fair amount of money into it.
Yep.
But we're probably not going to do anything more to it for a long time.
Yeah.
And,
we would like an extra camera.
Exactly. I mean, like, unless something breaks, but like until our budget
Yeah.
really increases,
Yep.
it's just not something because, like, for example, like you were saying, we have two cameras. One of them is our worship camera, and it is significantly worse than the other. I mean, it's older. We've had it forever. It's fine, but like the color is really bad, and obviously during worship you have like darker lights too, so
Yeah.
that works against it. It's just not great. But honestly, like someone was asking me about this the other day. Honestly, we're not gonna we're not gonna invest a ton more money into it because we want we don't we're not trying to we're not trying to replicate Sunday morning for home. I guess
Yeah.
is the moral of the story. We want if a new person watches it, we want them to see what a Sunday morning's like. We want them to see what the experience is like and get a little bit of a picture. And obviously, if someone has to miss, we don't want them to feel like they have nothing because they had to stay at home sick. But it's just not going to be the same. And I'm not comfortable pouring just like thousands upon thousands of dollars in to try and make it the exact same thing when in reality we're telling people, please don't watch it at home for a long period of time. Like if you want to check out the church, great, check it out, watch a week or two. But this is not. I mean, can I say it? This is not church watching it from home. Like this is just not the same thing. And so when we look at like things to improve, I think it's good if you're doing live stream to improve it if you can. But eventually there has to come a point where it's like, this is as far as we're going to go in our budget. Maybe if we grow, but as far as we're going to go, because we're not going to try and convince ourselves that it's the same thing at home as it is here, because it's not.
And I think this is where conviction comes in. So it's our conviction.
Yes.
If yours is different, then that's fine.
True.
But this is also a good point when it comes to preparedness. So although our live stream experience, there are things that we could do to make it better.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a lack of preparedness that's stopping us from doing that.
Right.
It's us convictionally thinking other things are important.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say like, if there's a reason you do certain things a certain way because of your conviction, that's fine. But again, especially in the church planning world, I just find a lot of people just assuming their church is going to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And so certain things they don't do very well, but it's not convictional. It's just like, it doesn't matter. And so, don't feel bad to emphasize that. And, I think live stream stuff is good. I know some churches are taking it back down. I mean, we're not going to do that because it's beneficial. I think there are some people that probably stay home sometimes when they normally wouldn't have.
Yeah.
And that's fine. It's, it is what it is. But all that to say, in-person is important. I know if you're listening to this, you're like, I agree. So
yeah. Well, and I like they said that it's a lot about what your conviction is, because it's been tough this past whatever we are, year and a half maybe, of all like the people that have come out and said, like, even people that like I respect and follow and coming out and saying like that online church is whatever. I'm paraphrasing, but the wave of the future, and like it's the same, and we gotta and if we expect people just to come into our doors, then we're behind the times. Whatever. Obviously that's paraphrased, but people are saying stuff like this, and even people that's personally like that I follow and have listened to in the past, and sometimes it's like it's tough sometimes it feels like you're like the lone person in the room to be like, I kind of feel like people need to come in the doors, And so if that's the way you're convicted, I also know like we probably have people listening that are doing like online only church. So
Yep.
I get people have different convictions. But if you are convicted of like, I feel guilty telling people they should come in, don't feel guilty. Like I mean, I don't disagree with you, but like follow your conviction. If that's what you feel like is best in your context and you feel like that's the way that you're led, then don't feel guilty telling people
Yeah, I
that.
think one of the dangers of this COVID stuff is like making innovation the gospel and not
Yes.
Jesus.
Yeah,
And
that's
talk
good.
about we need to change for the future. And we're pro innovation and trying new things. We've tried new things, but like there's just nothing's going to replace people gathering together. You know, if you're going through a good time or a bad time, online church is not there for you. You know, it's fine for someone to send you an email or text message. It's a lot better to be with somebody. And so innovate and do all those sort of things. But I also think I don't know. There's a lot of things, but like weekly gathering on a Sunday, I don't think that should ever not be a thing.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's on a different, churches have it on different days because they're bigger, people are working.
Sure.
Great. But like having a weekly rhythm is a good thing. And so, I don't know. Jesus is the point, not innovation. So we want to innovate, but like some things just aren't going to change, and that's okay because they're proven to be the most helpful.
That's a really good point. I remember, gosh, years ago hearing someone at Exponential, a church planting conference, say something along the lines of, I don't remember how he said it, but that like innovation is either, or it can be like the greatest thing you can do and the worst thing you can do. Like you can, there are places you should innovate, and it's great to come up with new ideas. I mean, we've come up with new ideas over the past few years that some of them are really great and some of them are really crazy. But it's good to come up with new ideas and not just do things the way you've always done it because that's the way you've done it. But you can innovate yourself to death. Like you can try and do things so different from the way things are done that you end up working against yourself. And this goes for everything, not just church. But you know, if you're just passionate about church should not just be Sunday morning, and so we're going to do things completely different. You may have the right motives behind it, but I don't know that we need to innovate away from encouraging people to meet on a regular basis. You know, and so there's just that line to toe of innovate, sure, but don't innovate too much, I guess. That's a weird way to say it, but I think
we're humans. We need regular rhythms together to build a strong community where people can grow. So, all to say, you miss out if you don't go in person. And then last but not least, encouragement to do this, to think through the accessibility of your church. And what I mean by that is, you know, Disney's very, you know, people like handicap, whatever, like they're just, and everything that they do. I mean, even the Skyliner thing was impressive to me. They have, you know, it's kind of like a ski lift, but enclosed is the best way to explain it.
Okay.
And it's not very big. You know, the doors aren't very big, and it never stops. So when it gets to the platform, it goes slow, so you can get it out and get in and get out, but it doesn't stop. And so the first morning we rode it, I was like, you know, what do people do if they're like in a wheelchair? You know, because Disney is, they've got, or if they've got, you know, whatever, you know, this could be a moving platform. And then I saw, obviously this was really expensive, like this, it would loop around, but like when it got to the station where it would loop around and you would get in or get off, there was like this extra section where there was always at least one like pod thing sitting there. And so if you needed a wheelchair, it didn't move. And so if you were like handicap accessible, your group would go into that one, and then it would like leave that section and go back into the normal rotation, and another like pod that was coming in would go there.
Oh, wow.
And so it was just like
Interesting.
even something that you would assume is not accessible to people who have a disability was.
Yeah.
And so that, you know, it was just really cool. Like everything, even some of their rides. I'm not sure exactly how some of them worked because people were like in wheelchairs and stuff, and I don't know how they got in, but some of them, like the big boat rides where you like sit and, you know, you like slowly go through stuff. I noticed a couple of their boats were different, and like they were typically empty unless there was a handicap. So like you could put a wheelchair on it and stuff like that. Now, obviously, there's a lot of money involved, and they can do stuff like that. The question is, what do we do? I think it's just to think through how accessible your space is. You know, we had for a long time, they stopped coming, you know, during COVID, but we had a couple that he was in a wheelchair, and our old space was just not great. And there's nothing we could do about it. I mean, the space was small. It just wasn't. Our new space is a lot better. It's flat and long. But one of the things that we did was, you know, for example, we always had a handicap sticker thing on the floor where a chair was, and there was never a chair, and that was always there.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a thing, you know, for you or for your church, but just thinking through, you know, how can this be helpful for someone who might, you know, need it. Now, again, you might not have the resources to do everything, and I get it. So, like, you know, what if you know, some churches have like bigger churches typically have someone who does sign language like off the stage and people. And so, yeah, if you can't afford to do that,
Sure.
I'm not like trying to guilt people, but just thinking through, you know, what are some things we can help? And I would say this way: if you have someone at your church who has a disability in some way, I would encourage you to ask them. You might feel awkward doing this, they won't feel awkward.
They want you to ask.
Ask them,
in
hey,
most
what can we
cases.
do to help you?
Yep.
And if you're listening to this, you're probably not a big mega church, and so you're not going to have tons of people, but you might have a person who's in a wheelchair or who has some sort of disability that you might be able to accommodate in some way if you would ask. And so I would encourage you to ask them and to think through, how could we help this person? In an ideal world, you would just like change your space to be wheelchair accessible. But like, I get it. We don't have the money. We don't have the budgets. If we're in a school, if we're somewhere that like we got to do the best we can. But you might have someone who has, or a couple people who have a specific thing that you might be able to accommodate if you ask them.
Yeah. And especially talking about like physical things in your physical space, don't assume that you're fine, I would say, especially even if you're portable, so you're in a school or a community center, or I mean, most people I'm sure listening to this didn't build their own space, so they probably don't have control over the way it was built. And there are codes that places have to be up to be wheelchair accessible. So it can be easy to think, and I think we probably didn't really think about it until we were faced with the issue. But in both spaces we were in, obviously they're built before us. There are other businesses there that had to be accessible. It would be easy to think like we're just fine. Because we're up to code and that's the way it is. But with our old space specifically, when this family would come, like there's a sidewalk which is a little bit raised from the parking lot, obviously, and there's a ramp to get up, which is fine. But there's a lot of times like the ramp was like remember it was like crumbling at the bottom. It was
and
like
the
kind of
sidewalk
breaking
was
apart.
small. Often people standing on the sidewalk trying to get to the space, and then you had to like take a sharp right turn, and the door was small.
Yes,
it just was not.
So like it was not ideal, and like. It was probably up to code, I'm sure that we weren't violating anything, but things like the ramp was kind of in disrepair a little bit, and things that you don't really notice if you're not using it, but watching him try and use it, you really notice, and you're like, oh my gosh, I mean, honestly, or obviously, it wasn't like on us to fix the parking lot, but it's just something to be aware of, and something that maybe you can bring up to a landlord or something like that, and so take a look around with some fresh eyes, and don't just assume, regardless of the space you're in, that everything is fine. Because you may have some like narrow hallways or narrow doorways that maybe a wheelchair I'm sure can physically get through, but is it going to be super uncomfortable and difficult? Or is there a place for them to sit? Like you were saying, is there a place in your auditorium that they can go to and not feel like they're blocking an end of a row if they have to sit at the end of a row? So there's just a lot of things to think through. And I would definitely encourage you, if you have someone who has a disability at your church, to ask them. Like Dylan said, I think that I don't mean to speak for anyone else, but I think the majority of people would not only not be offended, but appreciate you asking them, and that you want to accommodate for them, and not just assume that they need to, force themselves to accommodate to you.
Yeah, and they might already feel awkward about their situation. Mm-hmm. So if you can go out proactively try to accommodate them so that they don't feel as out of place. So if it's like a auditorium with like chairs that don't move, and so they're always like in the in the
aisle.
That might make them feel awkward. Now, there might be a solution that if you ask them, they could tell you to help them feel not as out of place, as they might otherwise do. So just all that to say, think through the accessibility. If you have somebody, ask them how you might be able to help them.
Yeah, that's good.
Those are 6 things church planners can learn from Disney. As of this recording, we are like 2 or 3 or 4 people away from 1,000 people in our Practical Church Planning Facebook group. So if you're not in there, come on, be our 1,000th member.
That's right. Come on.
And if you're launching a church in the next year or so, be sure to go to practicalplanning.com/launch, get our Growing Your Launch Team course. I guarantee that you'll grow, if not double your launch team, at least 10 people. Mm-hmm. The question is $149 worth 10 people joining your launch team? In fact, if that doesn't happen, you get your money back.
That's right.
Because don't spend money on stuff that doesn't help. So practicalplanning.com/launch, an online course for what you can do to grow your launch team. Thanks for listening. We'll be with you next time on Practical Church Planting.